sound better.
So in this video, we're going to talk about how to design the bass of this track. As you can see, I have a main bass and 4 different responses. Let's see how this sounds. Okay, I think it sounds pretty cool. So we're going to jump right next to our main bass. Let's see how I've made this patch. So basically, the oscillator A and B have 2 square waves. I've edited the default signal by dragging and drawing my new square wave on this oscillator. In oscillator A, I have 16 voices in the unison mode. They are pretty close to each other, but they are not they are not blended at all. It's just at 75%, 73. It's okay. Oscillator B is also a square wave, and they are both fine detuned just a little bit, as you can see right here. I've also used a sub oscillator in the direct out mode, noise in the ARP in the pink noise mode, and then I've filtered the signal with a low pass filter, filtering of course both oscillators. Now in the FX section, I've used a distortion. The distortion unit comes by default in the tube mode. The tube mode is a great distortion also, but I think it's way too warm, and the asim generates a lot of vital harmonics to this kind of sounds. Then I've used a reverb in the hold mode. Notice that I've cut some of the lower frequencies, so we don't get a muddy sound. Not too much mix of it, so we can have just a little bit of tail, just a little bit of depth to the sound. And then I've cut it and boosted just a little bit at the 150, 170 area or so. And then I've boosted just a little bit in this part of the higher part of the frequency spectrum. Another important part of this patch is, well, of course, I have mentioned it before, but this has to be in the monophonic switch has to be turned on, and the portamento just about 130 milliseconds. It's okay. Now the main key for this bass is to have this kind of rhythmic behavior, is to have one LFO, to configure one of our LFOs directly to our sound sources. In this case, as you can see, LFO1 is triggering the main volume of oscillator A, oscillator B, main volume of noise, and the main volume of my sub bass. Notice also that I've created some automatations to the rate of this LFO. This is just to create this rhythmic and interesting patterns. Let's see how I have this. Let me just solo this track. Okay, I have messed up. I have messed a little bit of with the rate of the LFO, and I think it got into a quite interesting place. But of course, you can always create your own your own rhythmic patterns with the rate of the LFO. I've also forgot to mention, just as we move forward, the cutoff must cut at 120, 140 kilohertz to get this kind of beefy sound, and the resonance, we have to get it almost to the 60% of it. So the LFO is also modulating the dry parameter in my distortion. Notice that this kind of modulation tends to distort even more the signal. It gets more similar to a square wave. So I thought it was smart to do this kind of movements. As more parameters move, the more interesting the tone will get as we move forward to the track. So with LFO2, I've modulated with a rate of 2 bars, just a little bit of the cutoff. Let's see how this moves. It just opens a little bit. And I've also used my macro number 1 to move the filter, the cutoff filter. Okay, that's basically it for this. No, I forgot just a little parameter that is so important for this patch. The LFO4, I mean, I've used the LFO4, but you can use the LFO3, of course. The LFO4, I've set it to modulate the master tune, as you can see, and you can do this by entering this matrix menu. Let's see how the master tune sounds without being affected by the LFO. You can see that it's not that interesting. I mean, it's like the bass is singing a clear note, and we don't want that. We want this kind of weird morph sound, this darker tone, and also creepy. We don't want to get that that tonical information. So I've used the LFO4 in a 2-bar rate with a ramp down, so the tune of the synth will modify through the time. And also listen to the sub oscillator. I've turned it off, now we'll turn it on again so you can hear how it ramps down. I think this kind of things gets a really nice effect. Also, it's very important to the part where the bass will drop. Let's hear how this sounds. Pretty good. So let's see these responses. Now these responses are going to be quite different to the main bass, but in some of this I've used the same patch, just tweaking a little bit of things. Okay, let's jump into response number 1. Let's see how this sounds. Now you can see that I've also used a square wave. I've also fine detuned these ones. I've not used noise. The LFO, it's a little bit different, but it's I mean, it's also mostly the same setting. The main bass I have this like here, like this, and in this setting, in this preset, I have this like this. Notice that the main effect that gives this sound characteristic to the patch is this reverb. You can go into miscellaneous choose reverb, get a really low filter cutoff. You can see how this sounds without the filter. Pretty cool. And also, well, of course, I've modulated the LFO4 master tune. LFO2 also modulating just a little bit of the cutoff. And in the FX section, I've not used distortion this time. I've just used the reverb and also the EQ. Very similar setup to my main bass. As you can see, I've used the model of the previous patch, and I've just modified some things to be to not sound like a heavy bass, but also like a different sound. Let's see now response number 2. Now response number 2, it sounds like this. This is closer to my main bass, and I like the behavior of it, especially this part. Listen carefully. You can hear that in this part it's something like something's closing. It's kind of sharp, really fast attack. Okay, this patch is different. This patch has sine waves, and I've used sine waves because I wanted to FM my oscillator B with my oscillator B. You can do this by clicking in the warp menu and selecting FM from B. So what's going to happen is the oscillator B is going to modulate the oscillator A. Same setup for the unison. I've not detuned this time. I wanted it to be more static. Same settings to the sub oscillator, and we have the difference right here that we have a high pass filter. As you can see, the LFO1, it's modulating my filter. We have this really sharp attack, and then we have this kind of reset because the MIDI note is not starting at the first bar and at the first note, I mean, of the bar, and we have the rate of this LFO to 1 bar. So this part of a note triggers this part of the LFO. Let me just play in the right place. Pretty cool. To accentuate that kind of behavior, I've modified the envelope, just giving a ramp up, really slow attack. In the FX section, I've used the distortion, just same as before, and I've used a compressor because I wanted to get a beefy sound. I've used it in a multiband mode. Here's how this sounds without the multiband. And here's with multiband. I kind of like this. Also, the noise is very important to this part. The noise and the multiband compressors as well. You can see that the LFO1 is just modifying, and also the cutoff, but also the warp parameter and the noise volume parameter. This kind of sharp attack that we get in our filter, we get it also in this knob. Okay. Let's see response number 3. You can see that this one is not meant to be a bass. It's also closing this section where all the responses are attacking. This is the last response that attacks. I've filtered out some parts of the lower frequencies of the spectrum of this sound. I've also made this in Serum. We have 2 sine waves, also with 16 voices in the oscillator A. And the main key to this kind of behavior, it's kind of rhythmic pattern to it, is to have, of course, an envelope that gets a sharp attack at 0, decay at just a little bit of it, and the LFO is modulating in triplets, eighth notes, uh, all the levels of the sound sources, and also just a little bit of the FM from B. Notice that to get this kind of tones, you have to, this kind of rhythmic pattern, you have to activate the triplet switch. In the FX section, I've also used distortion and reverb, but this time in distortion, I've used the X shaper. I didn't want to use the other ones, the other kind of modes, because they were way too distorted. It doesn't quite fit my intentions. I wanted this sound to not to be as heavy as the other responses or the main bass as well. Notice also that in the other patches I've used just this filter out, and now we have this at like 5000, 5050. Okay, cool. Let's see response number 4 last. This one has a similar behavior to the previous one, but it's a little bit of more noisy and pronounced. You can see that I've used triangle waveforms, a bandpass filter. I have this kind of behavior now in the LFO. Quickly ramps up to the middle, and then it drops really, really fast. It has also a slow attack. And the LFO is modulating, of course, as always, this the level parameters of my oscillators. I've also used noise, but I didn't want to modify the level of the noise with the LFO. And notice that this time I have 16 notes in triplets. I get just a little bit of modulation of the cutoff from my envelope, and the LFO2 is modulating the drive and the reverb. I wanted this backwards because I wanted it to start from the maximum point. You can see that it has kind of a little tail of reverb that is nice. Cool. So that's a little bit of how you design this kind of sounds. Let's see the processes I've used in the main group of the bass. I've used the preset OTT. I've just turned off the high and mid parts, and I've just turned on the low. I think the OTT kind of glued all together very softly and gets this more pronounced beefy tone to it. Okay, the fade to gray, it's a modulation effect that you can get from the audio effect rack here on performance and DJ. Fade to gray, and I find this one to be interesting, not as a process plugin per se, but to use it to introduce elements very softly. Let's see how I introduce the bass with this fade to gray. from the point 33 it's turned on, and then before it was turned off. I mean backwards. 33 and so on, it's turned off, and 33 and before it was turned on. As a final process, I've made a send, and I've used this pre-amplifier in the aggressive bass preset, and I've sent it all the way up. And then you just modify the volume with the main fader of this one. I have set it up minus 12 dB. Okay, that wraps it up for the bass. I'll see you in the next tutorial.